Whether you're an old school gamer like me or a younger person looking to dive into video game history, starting a retro game collection for the first time can be a little intimidating if you don't know where to start. So before you start pulling your hair out in frustration, I'm going to share with you a few tips that I wish someone would have told me years ago when I first started collecting. Why hello you lovely little peppercorns, my name's Noa Lee and I've been collecting video games for most of my life, but I've only really started taking it seriously in the last 12 years or so. In that time my collection has grown from a couple hundred games on a shelf to a couple thousand games on several shelves. And while I don't really regret anything that I've added to my collection over the past decade and a half, there have been a few things that I wish I would have taken into consideration early on that would have made the collecting process less of a headache and a hell of a lot more fun. So tip number one, ask yourself why you want to start collecting retro games in the first place. This is the question that I think most collectors know on an intuitive level, but rarely think about consciously. For me, it was that I wanted to explore video game history and found retro games to be a great way to gain first-hand experience. For some, it may be that they want to relive a piece of their childhood and play games that they have fond memories of, or finally check out some games that they remember seeing on store shelves but were never able to play, or do it because they just want to explore a system that they've always wanted but never got to experience. And for some, it's all about that cheddar. Headlines about retro games selling for thousands of dollars or stories of people finding unopened copies of Super Mario Bros. For $2 at a rummage sale has prompted the media and many people outside of gaming culture to see retro games as an untapped gold mine, so they start collecting, thinking that in a few years, they're gonna be rich. By the way, if your main reason for collecting games is because you think it's a good investment, it's not. You'd be better off collecting stamps. Asking yourself this question early on is important as it focuses your collecting and how you spend your money, and more importantly, it allows you to figure out which games and systems appeal to you most. My personal recommendation is to go with a system that you had when you were a kid if you're looking to recapture a piece of your childhood, or go with a system you've always wanted or found interesting but never got to experience, and stick with that one system for a while and build up a respectable library before moving on, which brings me to tip number two, focus on games, not on hardware. This is a major mistake that I made when I first started out, and have continued to make pretty much until the last few years or so. When I first started collecting, it was all about the hardware, man. I had to have every system under the sun, so I spent all my money on consoles, and guess what happened? I ended up with a dozen hunks of plastic and metal that sat around collecting dust because I didn't have any games to play on them. For example, here's my Magnavox Odyssey 2 that I never play. Underneath of that is an Atari 2600 and a thing that I never play. Going under here is a ColecoVision that I never play. Going under here is an Intellivision 2 that I never play. Going over here into the dark is a TurboGrafx 16, which I never play. Going up here is a Sega Master System out of focus and in the dark, and I never play it. Going over there, I'm not counting that quite yet. Oh, look at that, there's a Sega Saturn that I never play. A Sega Dreamcast that I never play unless I feel like playing Crazy Taxi. Going down here, I definitely don't fucking play that piece of shit, but you know, I'm not really counting it as retro. Going down here, that is a 3DO that I never play. Going over here is a Virtual Boy that I never play, and a Commodore 64 that I never play. And oh, that's a Sega Game Gear that, well, I kind of play that every once in a while. Nah, just kidding, I never fucking play this thing. And some Game Boys that I also never play. You know what retro systems I actually play? NES, Super Nintendo, and Sega Genesis. And sometimes PS1 and N64. Looking back, it was a bit silly of me to start by collecting systems because a lot of those, like the Atari 2600 and the Odyssey 2, are consoles that I appreciate from a historical perspective, but don't really enjoy playing all that much. My money would have been better spent increasing a library of games for the systems I actually do enjoy playing. This kind of goes hand in hand with a more metaphysical question of where exactly you get your enjoyment of retro games from. Is it the physical experience of popping a dusty cartridge into a hunk of plastic and metal and flipping a switch on a system, or is it just the game itself that you're enjoying? If it's the latter, i.e. you don't care what you're playing on, so long as you're playing a game that you enjoy, save yourself the money and get a Retron 5 or an NES/SNES Classic, or find some other way to play the games you want to play. Just stay away from those at-games Sega Genesis things because those are straight up garbage town. Tip number three, buy games that you're actually going to play. This seems like a no-brainer, but I can't tell you how many collectors I've seen over the years that will get a new system and look up some arbitrary list of games that you must own for that that system, only to find out that most of those games aren't really their cup of tea. For example, let's say you decide to get a Super Nintendo because it's a system that you've never really experienced, so you don't really know where to start. If you look up a list of games that you must own, you're going to see the likes of Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island, Donkey Kong Country, Castlevania 4, Super Metroid, Mega Man X, etc. Now, for the sake of argument, let's say that you're not really big into platformers, so all of the must-own games that I just mentioned probably aren't going to be for you. So why on earth would you buy them? Just because they're classics and just because everyone recognizes them as great games doesn't mean that you personally are under any obligation to spend your money on them. Again, it sounds like a no-brainer, but practically every collector I've ever seen, including myself, has fallen into this trap of buying a game that they personally dislike just to fill some arbitrary need to complete their collection. Well, I've got an N64 now, so I guess I gotta get a copy of GoldenEye, even though I've personally never enjoyed the game and will never play it, but hey, it will certainly look good collecting dust on my shelf, along with all the other N64 games whose labels I can't actually see ever. Now down the road, after you've collected a bunch of games that you personally enjoy playing, you might want to pick up some of the classics, but you should only do so if you derive enjoyment from the act of collecting itself, not because you saw a Watch Mojo video on the best SNES games or something like that. At the end of the day, collecting games should be fun. If you only have fun while actually playing the games, avoid buying the games that you probably won't play. But if you're having fun finding a classic out in the wild and adding it to your collection, even if you don't ever play it, it's still worth it. Just be mindful of why you're collecting games in the first place and tailor your purchases accordingly. Tip number 4, buy local if you can. If you live near any moderately sized city, you're almost certainly going to have access to a store that buys and sells retro games, and in my opinion, these are the kinds of places that usually have the best deals and the fairest prices. Part of the reason for this is due to the decreased demand for these kinds of games compared to a website like eBay or Amazon. There are just far fewer customers walking in the door that are interested in buying retro games, so the prices have to be competitive if they actually want to sell them. This is especially true nowadays since everyone's got a phone in their pocket that can tell them almost instantly whether the price is fair or not. After all, why would you pay $50 for a game in store when you can find the same game online for much cheaper? For example, a couple of weeks ago I got a copy of Landstalker for the Sega Genesis complete in box and with the manual at my local retro store for $45, yet going on eBay, the only copy I can find that fits its description is being sold for $60. Of course, you can also check thrift stores and rummage sales and places like that where you might find a couple deals, but just be aware that resellers have probably already picked these places over pretty well, so keep your expectations low. Of course, the downside of buying local is that it could be quite a while before a game you're looking for comes around, so it might be worth the extra money to hit up eBay from time to time to get your hands on a game that you really want or are unlikely to find out in the wild. Tip number 5, decide now if you're going to collect in-box games or loose cartridges. This is really important because if you decide that you want all your games in box down the road, but most of your collection is made up of loose cartridges, you're going to have to re-buy all of those games or pay out the ass on the rare occasion when you find someone just selling the box and manual, which doesn't happen very often. Again, this depends on how you get enjoyment out of the hobby. If you only enjoy playing games on their actual hardware and don't care about how they look on a shelf or what their value is, screw it, save yourself some money and just buy them loose. But if you really enjoy the idea of having a complete set that is game, box, and manual, or you just like the idea of preserving a piece of video game history, start collecting in box and stick with it. The extra monetary investment will almost certainly pay off in the end, regardless of whether you choose to continue collecting in box or not. Let's say that you start collecting NES games in the box, and after a few years you decide that you no longer care about the cardboard and just want to collect the cartridges. Do you go out and rebuy all your games? No, just take it out of the box, put them on your shelf, and sell the box and manual on eBay or take them to a convention. You might not make all your money back, but you're certainly going to save money in the long run compared to rebuying loose games in box, and you'll be helping some other collector with their collection. Personally, I only collect games in box if it's on a system whose games come in a hard plastic case like the Sega Genesis or as a disc-based system like the PS1, which is good for me since the games on these systems usually don't cost all that much more in case than they do loose anyway. And tip number 6, don't let anyone tell you how to collect games. Which I know is a bit ironic since that's kind of what this video is about, but I'm just giving some advice. Whether or not you take it is up to you. The unfortunate reality of collecting retro games, or collecting anything for that matter, is that there is a lot of elitism surrounding the hobby. People who feel like they are experts on the subject and won't hesitate to tell you that you're doing it wrong or dismiss you as not being a real collector simply because the games you choose to collect don't have enough clout or aren't of a certain monetary value. Wait a minute, hold the phone. You have a Super Nintendo, but you don't have Earthbound, Wild Guns, or Pocky Rocky 2? What are you, casual? Spend any amount of time on a forum or at a convention that focuses on retro gaming, and you're sure to run into these people, and they'll be sure to critique anything that you have to say or any game that you add to your collection that doesn't fit their personal standards. And you should just ignore these people, because at least in my opinion, if you're having fun collecting games, you're doing it right. I found over the years that pretty much every elitist retro collector I've come into contact with ends up being a very insecure individual who has a need to feel better than other people simply to fill a void in their life, that telling others how they should collect games is a direct reflection of their own personal conflicts. When these individuals see others collecting games in a manner that differs from their own, they immediately get defensive, because if someone's doing it differently, that means that they're not acknowledging them or their superior game collecting skills, and therefore they don't get the attention that they crave, so they try to cut others down in order to feel better about themselves. But more importantly than all of that, collecting games is just a hobby, and hobbies should be fun, and anyone that tries to ruin your fun, well, they can fuck right off. So there you go, a few tips that will hopefully help you out if you're diving into the world of retro game collecting for the first time, or have only been collecting for a few years. Hopefully you got something out of it. Make sure that you watch this video right here if you're interested in some more retro game goodness and some more of my shenanigans, and as always, I hope to see you next time as we continue our quest to make the world of video games a better place, one unpopular opinion at a time.